Good day, and welcome to the Lilly Roddy Show, coming to you from the LRS studios here in Houston, Texas. And as always, I'm so glad to have you with me today as I share my astrology for the week of October the 25th through the 31st, 2015. And of course, the 31st is Halloween. And I'm sorry we didn't have a show last week. We were having some technical difficulties. But I do wish to thank the people who emailed me and asked what was going on. And I know y'all all want to know about the weather here in Houston. It's a bit cooler and we're getting a lot of needed rain. You know, we had a huge amount of rain here in April, and then we've almost been dry for the rest of the year. So hopefully that improves a little bit and we're not so much in that drought. If you would like to get in touch with me for a private session or to leave me a question or comment about my show, you can always reach me at LillyRoddyShow@AOL.com, LillyRoddyShow.com, or find us on Twitter, Pinterest, or Facebook. On those sites, you can find my daily interpretations for each day of the week. I also write a monthly column for Outsmart Magazine, outsmartmagazine.com, here in Houston, and I was just recently voted by the magazine readers of Outsmart to be the best astrologer in Houston for 2015. I just wanted to say thank you very much for all the people that voted for me, and it's always a great honor to be recognized for what you do, so thank you very much. For this week's show, we'll be looking at the activity of the week of October the 25th through the 31st. We'll be looking at the two long void moon times and the full moon in Taurus on the 27th. And I thought I would look at the planetary cycles and how they affect us as a population. So let's start off with what's going on for this week. This week we start off with strong aspects on Sunday. We're having Venus conjunct Jupiter and Mercury opposing Uranus, both on that day. Venus and Jupiter will draw out more of our need to express ourselves physically and in our environment, while Mercury opposing Uranus will stimulate our intellectual or inquisitive side of our personality. And of course, both these aspects have been going on for a couple of days, so they should be especially strong on Sunday, October the 25th. It's probably a good day to be busy and active, taking on some weekend warrior chores. Be careful not to overcommit yourself to any project, as you'll tend to be more optimistic about how long it will take you. And because of the Venus-Jupiter conjunction, we'll want to believe it won't take very long. And Venus and Jupiter are more connected to our physical and sensual nature. So if you were to do some barbecuing on Sunday, it may taste like some of the best barbecue you ever had. The Mercury-Uranus opposition could easily make us very chatty or especially inquisitive. And it could easily affect our sleep patterns, making it hard to get to sleep. This combination of planets can also make us not have a lot of patience. Keep your Sunday schedule flexible or only do exactly what you want to do, and you'll do well with that Mercury-Uranus opposition. On Monday the 26th, we have a very long void moon. The void moon starts at 7:25 a.m. on Monday and lasts until early Tuesday morning. And this essentially means that most of the workday on Monday will be operating under a void moon in Aries. Now, I know a lot of people ask me about void moons, and I did do a show on that topic a couple of weeks ago to try to explain what void means and how that affects us all. When the moon is void, it simply means that our emotional nature is running the show. We are more concerned about fulfilling our own internal expectations rather than the expectations that exist outside of ourselves, such as our family, our job, or our friends, those expectations that we have about them. So with the void moon in Aries, you should follow your emotional impulses and do what seems important. You should try and schedule your more important social expectations on Tuesday. Now on Tuesday, October the 27th, we have a full moon in Taurus at 7:05 a.m. With the full moon in Taurus, we'll be wanting to take it all in. We won't be rushed, and we will be looking at things in a great amount of detail. The full moon will stimulate a greater need for personal intimacy, greater trust and loyalty, and a clear sense of common values. Now on Wednesday, October the 28th, we have another long void moon, but this one doesn't start until 10:20 a.m. And that means we have some opportunity to get some of our early morning tasks done before the moon goes void. By evening time, we just may want to stay close to home. The moon does enter Gemini very early Thursday morning, and the moon is no longer void, of course, then. I want to make mention that happening on November 20th, 2015, here in Houston, the Houston Astrological Association is bringing in a speaker, Maria Matus, and she'll be talking about vocational analysis in the astrology chart. This will be occurring from 7 p.m. until 9 p.m. at Body, Mind, and Soul Bookstore. Again, November 20th, 2015. This is Friday evening. And the cost is $10 for members and $20 for non-members. I hope to see many of you there. Maria is a very interesting and an extremely knowledgeable astrologer. Well, today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that's planetary cycles. Now, a planetary cycle is essentially a planet making a whole cycle around the zodiac and completing one whole cycle. And the most common planetary cycle that we know about is our solar cycle, or our yearly trip around the sun, the 365 and a quarter day cycle. Now, we all know this planetary cycle, not only because we feel it and see it, but we're constantly reminded by our calendars. So we can look outside. We're knowledgeable enough to understand this yearly cycle. We see the seasons change. We see flowers come and go. People change. The weather changes. This is this very natural solar cycle that we live in. Now, all of the other planets have their own calendar and their own cycle. And we know a lot about these cycles because we experience them all as human beings. Now, let me give you a cycle that we're aware of, but you may not know the planetary significance. Let's take a brief look at the calendar of Mars. Now, it takes Mars approximately 2 years to make a cycle around the zodiac. And in astrology, Mars represents the self, confrontation, protection, anger. And when this happens, when Mars cycles all the way around for the very first time, and we do our Mars return, when this happens in children, what do we call that? The terrible twos. Children are simply expressing their Martian energy, defining their sense of reality via Mars. As adults, we continue to do this 2-year cycle with Mars, but we're more socialized and we deal with that energy better. Some of us do anyway. And in astrology, we call this having a Mars return, which is Mars returning to the same place as it was when you were born. Now, in astrology, we refer to a birthday as a solar return. And that means the sun coming back to the place in the chart where it was when you were born. And of course, that changes a little bit from year to year because the orbital path around the sun is not consistent. Let's have a look at Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune and how they affect us and look at their calendars as well. Let's start with the calendar of Saturn. This is usually one of the easiest understood planetary cycles because it repeats often enough for us to see it, even though that it takes a while. And in our chart, Saturn represents our parents, authority figures, social expectations, and the notion of career. It takes Saturn approximately 28 years to make a whole cycle around the zodiac. And in astrologies, we count on every quarter cycle or every 90-degree turn that the planet makes. So in astrologies, for the calendar of Saturn, we place great significance on the fact that it takes 7 years, or approximately 7.5, to make a quarter turn or 90 degrees. And of course, then the one we're most familiar with is the one that comes at around 14 or 15 when Saturn sits opposite its position in the chart. Now, our first big Saturn contact comes to us around 7 or 8 years old. And this is essentially when Saturn has moved 90 degrees from its original birth position. This is our first time to be stepping up and being more responsible, even though we're young children. We're feeling the sense of judgment and expectation from the school, our teachers, and our parents. The next big Saturn contact comes approximately 7 years later when Saturn in the sky sits opposite Saturn in our chart. And of course, this occurs for all of us around 14 or 15 years old. And this is the teenage time. This is when we all begin to challenge our authority figures and try to grow and become more mature. We all experience that same impulse at the same age to push against the people that at one point we thought the sun rose and set in them. And then another 7 years later, around the age of 21, Saturn has moved another 90 degrees along the zodiac. And of course, the age of freedom, drinking, voting, all seem to come around this 21-year-old time frame. There's an expectation that we're supposed to be getting our act together, trying to finish school, and find a job. And finally, after 28 years, when Saturn moves its last 90 degrees, that's when we have our first Saturn return, or Saturn coming back to the place in the chart where it was when we were born. From my point of view, this is the time when we begin to put on our young adult clothes at 28 and take on the social duties and obligations that are expected. People tend to get married or divorced. They have children. They start their career. It's the time when we first try to become essentially our own authority figure. Now, approximately 14 to 15 years later, when Saturn opposes itself, much like it did when you were 14 and 15, we begin to rebel against ourselves and the plans and goals that we set for ourselves. And of course, we all know that time is part of the midlife cycle when people are reviewing and reassessing where they are in their life. And what's happening to you is now you're the authority figure because you're the one that set up these goals that you have for yourself. And then right around 42, 43, we confront those goals and try to make sure they fit us. And finally, around the age of 58, Saturn comes back to where it was when you were born for the second time. It represents the completion of the first Saturn cycle that you started at 28. And what that means is you're just sort of coming to the end of a lot of things that used to be important to you. In our culture, this tends to show up as the grandmother or the grandfather time. People are less concerned about their careers and are more concerned about their lives and essentially reestablishing new long-term goals. We no longer seek to become the authority figure because, of course, now we are the authority figure. We're older. We also have the opportunity to do a third Saturn return at 88. Now let's look at the calendar of Uranus. Uranus is about expressing your personal uniqueness within your own culture or society. Uranus takes approximately 84 years to make a whole cycle around the zodiac, and that particular ages that we pay attention to are related to those quarter turns or 90 degrees movement of Uranus around the zodiac. So the first big Uranian influence we have as a person in society occurs at 21 when Uranus squares Uranus. And of course, this ties in with the Saturn square. So the freedom aspect comes from the Uranus square, and the need to be your own boss comes from the Saturn square. We all experience both of those planetary cycles at the same time. That's why the age of 21 is such a big deal. Our second big Uranian influence occurs between the ages of 41 and 42 as part of the need to reinvent ourselves and free ourselves from the choices we've made in the past. And as you can see, that also falls in the midlife time frame as well. In my view, the midlife time frame occurs from about 39 through 44 generally. We can do a Uranus return, and that's, of course, when Uranus comes back to the point in your chart where it was when you were born, and that occurs for all of us around the age of 84. If you live long enough and experience that, that is a huge rebirth time where people are often rejuvenated and sort of start their lives anew. Our last outer planet that we're going to look at is Neptune and Neptune's calendar or cycle. Neptune's influences are to make us more aware of ourselves and what our internal, emotional, and spiritual needs are. It takes Neptune approximately 165 years to make a cycle around the sun, and the significant time periods are at 39 to 40 when Neptune makes its first 90-degree move, and then at 82 years old when Neptune has made its second 90-degree move and Neptune sits opposite itself in our chart. As you can see, the first big Neptune transit that we all share as human beings occurs at 39 at the very beginning of the midlife cycle. I always characterize this as a time when we sort of wake up and wonder why things aren't better. It's our time of personal spiritual pilgrimage. Of course, in our culture, we don't acknowledge this very much, so we characterize this as being lost or feeling depressed. In actuality, the Neptune transit is actually your time to go to Mecca and to look inside and ask yourself what you really want instead of what you can do. And at 82, we do our Neptune opposition. That means Neptune in the sky sits opposite the Neptune in our chart. I have found in working with older people, this is a common time when depression sets in and people feel as though they don't have a purpose or a place. And not so surprising from a disease point of view, Neptune rules dementia and Alzheimer's. And people tend to want to escape on some level during that time. So here we have these outer planets, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, and they cycle around and affect us at particular ages. We know the cycles, and for the most part, we know what they are and what we're expected to experience. In the 70s, I read a book called Passages by Gail Sheeny. And in her book, she essentially took common knowledge about what happens to people during certain ages in their lives. Now, she's a psychologist, so she had a lot of knowledge, and she, done a lot of research. Now, we all have individual transits from these outer planets, but those are particular to you. These age transits we all share as members of our society. And just so you know, it's Carl Jung, in his study of astrology and those planetary cycles, that led him to develop his views about midlife, which we now consider common knowledge in our society. So the knowledge of this cycle comes directly from astrology. So much of astrology infiltrates our lives in ways that we're not really aware of because we're so used to it. We live it. We live in it. So Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. The outer planet cycles are just fascinating, and they really direct us as human beings, sort of as a group, as we go through life. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me this week, and I hope you join me next week as we look at November 1st through November 7th of 2015. This is the Lilly Roddy Show, coming to you from the LRS studios here in Houston, Texas, reminding you to keep those stars in your eyes. Bye-bye.